Yes, it is now time for the Thursday evening my time, edition of the Gaggle live stream. So, welcome everybody who has joined me. Very happy to have you here. And there's a few things that I want to get to. Um, Probably some of you watched the Tucker Carlson presentation yesterday evening. It was 6 p.m. East Coast time. Got late for me. It was a 1 hour 40 minutes presentation of the principles that would inform this new political movement that Tucker Carlson is starting alongside Marjorie Taylor Greene, alongside Joe Kent, and Thomas Massey. So they famously posed for a photograph over the weekend, and naturally it came under a lot of attack. But this was the declaration of principles by Tucker Carlson. Now, apparently, according to Joe Kent, who gave an interview to with Cenk Uygur, they want him, Tucker, to run as the nominee of the third party. So far, apparently, Tucker has rejected their entreaties. We'll see whether he sticks to that. Now, of course, notoriously, third parties are very, very difficult to get off the ground because, of course, you want to get on all 50 state ballots, which is very, very challenging in the United States because you have to present, I don't know how many thousands of signatures. It's different with every state. But you've got to show that you've got the requisite number of signatures to get on the ballot in each state, which means that that Democrats and Republicans are able to challenge any would-be third party. And this they've done very, very successfully. They can just go on challenging them and say, hey, that's not a genuine signature. That person has moved away. That person is no longer a resident of the state. That person is dead or whatever. They can just go on challenging that. Of course, remember how that they killed Pat Buchanan's candidacy in 2000, precisely with these endless challenges in court. And of course, the Democrats and Republicans have very deep pockets, and so they can just go on going to court hearing, to court hearing, whereas the third party usually is limited in resources and ultimately can't go on fighting indefinitely. So I see here, Linz, a good friend Linz, it's nice to see you, has donated. Really appreciate your generosity. Very good to see you, Linz. So thank you so much for your donation. So, but that was a challenge. And then we know that Bobby Kennedy Jr. tried to do something similar in 2024. Then he gave up. So remember, his arc was a very peculiar one because he first sought the nomination of the Democratic Party. And of course, the Democratic Party wasn't going to allow him to challenge Biden. They pretty much made it clear to him that there's not going to be any scope for any kind of a challenge. There'll be no debates, so you'll not get any kind of a publicity. So he decided he's going to run as a third party candidate, and then he tried to get on the ballots in 50 states. And that was obviously a huge exercise, but then he gave it up and announced that now he was supporting Donald Trump, which was all of which it was within the arc of a few months. So it wasn't like he had undergone some long, complicated intellectual journey before he arrived as a supporter of Donald Trump and MAGA. So he starts off as a Democrat, and a couple of months later, he starts his own party. Then a couple of months after that, he joins Donald Trump. But anyway, so this is going to be the third party. I don't know how much they have in the way of resources. But obviously, Tucker is their unquestioned star. I mean, he's a brilliant communicator, as you could see during his 100-minute presentation yesterday. He's very, very good at distilling issues into very simple terms. He's very good at leaving things at a very general level, not getting into policy specifics, which I think is always a killer, because people get bored by policy wonk stuff. So without question, he would be the star and the natural nominee for this third party. And here I have to say that I rather like the American political system, in that there's always a possibility for outsiders to emerge to challenge the political establishment. Very, very hard to do it in Europe. And I want to go on later in this live stream. I want to discuss what's going on in Europe and the stark contrast between the kind of the radical populism on both the left and the right that you see in the United States, as opposed to the staid, unimaginative, idealist, principleless, useless politics in Europe. And so, in particular, we obviously have the emergence of a kind of a populism on the right. I mean, that's been the case really since 2015 and Donald Trump's emergence. And he, of course, tapped into the discontent that was expressed by the candidacies of Ross Perot and Pat Buchanan. But what was clear in 2015, and no one really gave him any kind of a chance when he announced his candidacy. It was just seemed like a joke in the summer of 2015. But what was clear is that people did not want to vote yet again for that same formula: corporate money paying for corporate welfare, endless wars, and essentially kind of the familiar tax cut, deregulation, and the rest of that dreary program. Plus, and here, of course, Trump was brilliant and tapped into it. Plus, of course, some what they call immigration reform. In other words, just bring everybody in, and for one reason only. And when it comes to these corporate sector types, for one reason only, and that is as a source of cheap labor. So Trump tapped into that, and obviously it was a great discontent that he tapped into. But of course, that was the year in 2016 when Bernie Sanders also ran in for the Democratic Party nomination. But he wasn't able to win, and the party establishment, and of course they changed the rules. It was very important that they changed the rules a long time earlier, to be fair. I mean, they changed the rules in the aftermath of the George McGovern debacle. They didn't want to go through another 49-state thrashing, but they changed the rules to make sure, with all the super delegates and so on, that the Democrats are not going to indulge themselves and vote for somebody who excites them, but is bound to lose the election. Bernie Sanders always, I think, was bound to lose the election because he really didn't have the courage of his convictions. He wasn't really prepared to pursue the kind of left-wing populism that might have appealed to America. He dropped the ball on the immigration issue, because back in around 2007, 2008, he was actually in favor of border controls. He said reasonably, which is what the left used to argue. Cesar Chavez, and of course, and other immigration restrictionists said, "Hey, this is open borders." Is a way for corporations to drive down the price of labor. Obviously, the more you have of something, the cheaper it becomes. I mean, you don't have to be an economic genius to understand that the more you have of something, the cheaper it's going to be. And that was the point of having essentially a constant flow of cheap labor. I mean, you had that obviously in Europe, particularly in Great Britain, which were also bringing in immigrants from the West Indies, but very much so in the United States. And Bernie Sanders, picked up on that, and he said, "Well, no border controls. That's the Koch brothers. That's the agenda of the Koch brothers." But of course, that was always going to be a problem to get in the Democratic Party in 2016, because the Democratic Party in 2016 had become, and had been already for some time, a very pro immigration party. Why? Because they saw new migrants as their source of future Democratic voters. They looked at the numbers and they said, for every five Hispanics who come in, three are going to vote for the Democrats, two are going to vote for the Republicans. So it's always there's a built-in advantage to Democrats among Hispanic immigrants. So therefore, the Democrats said, no, we want, they didn't explicitly say we want open borders, but the way they presented it was comprehensive immigration reform. In other words, amnesty for all illegals already living in the United States. And, we pinky promise that we will put immigration restrictions in place and keep out future migrants. Of course, we're not going to do that because when the way it always works, when they promise to allocate funds for future border security, we're going to put in all these sensors of early detection, and we're going to put in more border guards. Oh, and we'll put in more immigration judges who can expedite, the immigration process. We promise we're going to do all of that, but then, of course, next year comes around, and for the budget appropriations, and lo and behold, you don't have any money for any of that, and so then there's no money appropriated for all of those wonderful things that they promised. But the other part of it, the immigration amnesty, that stays. Once you have an amnesty, that's a given. That's there's nothing you can do about that. So in fact, then you are here for good. So that part, no one can change. That's why all of these agreements among Democrats and Republicans always worked in the favor of the Democrats, because their part of the deal was they would vote for all of these tough border controls on the at the fences, and build a wall, build fences, and whatnot. But then next year comes around, appropriate the funds. Then hey, money's tight. We just don't have the money, so we can't appropriate it, and that's it. So that part of the deal is then gone. So that was the agenda. Once Sanders adopted the position, hey, we're going to hand out all sorts of goodies to people, but because he was a distributionist, he's a redistributionist, not that interested in production. I mean, how do you actually produce things? How do you make things and sell them? And how do you make more of them? And how do you make sure that the things that you make are better and more desirable than the things that made by others? You never really considered those aspects. You just only considered about redistribution. Well, that only gets you so far. It's quite easy to say, well, we'll have free healthcare, free education, free housing, whatever. Just hand out all the goodies, and then somebody who's going to pay for all this? Well, we're just going to tax the rich. Well, that isn't going to work. I mean, even in countries like Britain, which used to have a powerful Labour Party that did promise those kinds of things, they finally were had to change their position. But anyway, that was Sanders did that. But what undermined him was his promise of all of these goodies that would be handed out to everyone, paid for by the rich, but open borders. Well, if you have open borders and you're handing out goodies, then everyone in the world and his uncle are going to want to come to the United States. Hey, they're handing out free healthcare, free education, free housing. Put me down for that. So, I mean, there was obviously a ridiculous program, and he wasn't going to win, and so he was defeated by a total party hack like Hillary Clinton, who at least had the sense not to put forward a program that obviously was a non-starter. But anyway, that was Sanders, and that was his best shot in 2016. He did the same thing in 2020, but by now his shtick had grown old and really didn't make that much of an impression, and in the end was easily defeated by Biden. So now you have a new generation of radicals. They sort of, well, I mean, obviously you had AOC, but now there's this, Abdul El Sayed in Michigan, and then you have, others. You have this woman in Wisconsin, and so there's a lot of excitement that this new radical spirit in the Democratic Party. And while Abdul El Sayed is certainly not my cup of tea, um, I kind of like the challenge to the Democratic Party establishment. That Democratic Party establishment has just been a complete waste of time and space for decades, really, ever since the Bill Clinton era. I mean, it was Bill Clinton who redefined the Democratic Party as essentially standing for nothing. It had abandoned the traditional big government, big spending programs of the FDR, and to a lesser extent the LBJ eras, and so it abandoned all of that. But it didn't really have anything to put in its place other than the kind of liberal social agenda, which had a limited appeal. I mean, it appealed to a kind of liberal, urban, upper crust base. They like that, liberal programs on abortion and gay rights and the rest. But the economic message just disappeared. But what the Democrats were able to do, and this is what Bill Clinton pulled off, was to generate huge amounts of money. He made just Clinton became a master at raising funds. They were just this is Republicans used to be good at raising money because they had all these the big business and big corporation friends, but the Democrats under Clinton really became masters of fundraising. And that, in a sense, is the Democratic Party. This is fundraising plus endless wars, which is now, built into the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party agenda is wars. So they've abandoned they sort of, I mean, the Democrats were never a peacenik party. They were always the Cold War party. In fact, when Bob Dole famously said in 1976, we had, about the 100 years of Democrat wars, he was actually right. I mean, they were all years what the Democrat wars: World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. They were all basically Democrat wars. He was correct. And then of course you had all the interventionism of Johnson, I mean, and not just in Vietnam, but I mean, the Dominican Republic and so on. But so that was the Democrats, but following the kind of the liberal McGovernite um, takeover of the Democrats, and they became briefly the Peacenik Party. So they were they supported peace, peace negotiations. Even then, it was always it was superficial that they were for peace, because you may recall that in 1972, again, Nixon was the sort of the centrist, the Vietnam president, and against George McGovern, the peacenik, who wanted to withdraw immediately from Vietnam. But when it came to the subject of détente with the Soviet Union, McGovern attacked Nixon for getting soft. He was soft on communism. He was soft on the Soviet Union. He was kowtowing to Brezhnev. So that's kind of been forgotten. That's very important to remember that was. I mean, it was already that was the emergence of the neoconservative movement was you could already see it in 1972. The sort of the Democrats who become very disillusioned with the party, because it seemed to become anti-war, anti-Vietnam, and where we they obviously detested McGovern, but they detested Nixon because they thought Nixon was soft on the Soviet Union, and Nixon wasn't doing enough to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union. They were criticizing. They were criticizing the Nixon administration for not doing enough to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union. And then, if you recall, it was the Democrats who started attacking Nixon's successor, Gerald Ford, for supposedly refusing to meet Solzhenitsyn. Oh, he doesn't meet Solzhenitsyn because he's soft. He wants to keep him with Brezhnev. So that was the Democrats. So even then, as I say, the peacenik label was not really deserved by the Democrats, but nonetheless, the Democrats did oppose half-heartedly, let's say half-heartedly, the Reagan administration's policy in Central America. But the Democrats were divided, even on that issue. I mean, some Democrats were opposed to the Reagan policy in Central America. Some Democrats, like Bill Bradley, were supported the Reagan administration policy. But anyways, for some reason, the Democrats were tagged as the peace party when they really weren't. But with Bill Clinton, they completely abandoned. They made no longer any sort of pretense that the Democrats were the peace party. And on the contrary, when Bill Clinton ran in 1992, he attacked George H.W. Bush for being soft on the Serbs. He was just giving everything to the Serbs. He was appeasing the Serbs. And Clinton said he was going to bomb the Serbs. He was going to, remember the slogan of the time: lift and strike. What is it? Lift and strike. Lift means lift the arms embargo on the states of Yugoslavia. He was going to lift them. In other words, to give the Muslims in Bosnia everything they wanted. Lift the arms embargo and strike. Obviously, the U.S. Air Force would strike the Serbs. That was Bill Clinton's platform. And then Bill Clinton also attacked George H.W. Bush for toasting, wining and dining with the butchers of Beijing. Remember, this was only a few years after the Tiananmen Square, and somehow he was attacking Bush and Brent Scowcroft for going soft on the butchers of Beijing. Anyway, that defined the Democratic Party, and they've just continued along those lines, and up to and including the 2016 fraud, when they accused Hillary Clinton, but of course Obama himself, they accused Trump of essentially being a Kremlin agent, because Trump had vaguely, and he was just vaguely, promised during the 2016 campaign to improve relations with Russia. He didn't did it in a half-hearted way, but this was elevated into some kind of a secret relationship, understanding with Putin. There's no basis for it whatsoever, but it had serious consequences because obviously the Obama administration and the FBI continued after Obama was gone. They launched this phony baloney FBI investigation into Trump's connections with the Kremlin. Of course, there weren't any, and they never found any, and there was no basis for opening the investigation. But that was launched by the Obama administration. But the point is, you had this the Democratic Party establishment, which is basically it's abandoned the sort of the big government, big spending era of the New Deal Democrats, and then the Great Society Democrats a generation later, and then they supported. The Democrats supported in 1965. That was a big Democratic piece of legislation that drastically liberalized immigration laws and thereby drastically changed the demography of the United States. It was the 1965 Immigration Act. And then, of course, under Clinton, they had the money raising, and they were, unabashedly the war party, unabashedly the party that desired war with Russia. And of course, the consequence of Russiagate, the consequence of the Obama-Hillary Clinton accusation against Trump that he was working for the Kremlin is that Trump felt during his first term he had to compensate for his having said some nice things about Putin. He had to compensate by sending lethal weaponry to Ukraine. So this was the whole irony of the whole thing, that Trump was accused of being pro-Russian, while he sent the kind of lethal weaponry that Obama had not sent, because Obama had, at least in 2016, had been cautious enough to avoid getting involved deeply in the war in Ukraine. But nonetheless, Trump did so. And then when Trump briefly hesitated about sending arms to Ukraine because somehow he was trying to get Zelensky to cooperate with his administration on investigating what the Bidens were up to in Ukraine, he felt that Zelensky wasn't doing enough to get to the bottom of the Biden family's activities in Ukraine with Burisma and so on. So Trump retaliated by withholding further arms deliveries to Ukraine. And then, of course, the Democrats impeached Trump for that. That was his great crime, that he withheld arms from Ukraine. That's the modern Democratic Party. Now, this is a disgusting political party. I mean, one has to be blunt about it. It stands for nothing. It's wholly warlike. It doesn't even make any pretense of pursuing peace. And then, of course, when after October the 7th, the Biden administration wholly identified itself with the cause of Israel, when Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel and said, "I come here as a Jew." So rather than saying what he should have said, that he's saying, what he's saying, why, I'm here as the Secretary of State of the United States. He says, "I come here as a Jew." So anyway, all of this is by way of returning to the issue of why the Democratic Party establishment is now in desperate trouble. They've been losing. They lost pathetically, abysmally to Mamdani in New York, a particularly miserable defeat. Because remember, New York, with its high percentage of Jews, and it's about the most Jewish place in the United States, nonetheless it lost to Mamdani, who not only was a Muslim but highly critical of Israel, and now it's been defeated in Michigan with Abdul El Saisi, who has won the Democratic primary, and I will venture to predict this, he will win the general election in November, because he's up against Mike Rogers, who not only lost the last time he ran for the Senate, that was in 2024. He lost the race in Michigan in the Senate, but he's a very traditional Republican neocon, and the voters of Michigan are not going to vote for that. So you got a situation where you've got this miserable Democratic Party establishment. You're getting a public, an American public, not just on the left but on the right, that's just about had it with Israel, just sick to death of Israel, and particularly not not even on the issue of just the horrific policy that Israel has pursued in Gaza. So leave that aside. The fact that essentially the United States has surrendered sovereignty surrendered it to Israel. And so rather than pursue the America First policy that Trump had promised, this is what Trump has said: America First. In other words, it's going to be what's good for America. We're not really concerned with what's good for Bosnia, what's good for Iraq, or whatever else. Is going to be what's good for the United States. And then, of course, the policy that Trump has actually pursued has been what's good for what's good for Israel. So he's gone along with that agenda, and obviously he's now has a serious criticism on the right, but you've now got insurgencies within the Democratic Party that is explicitly anti-Israel. This has never happened before. That never happened before. Yeah, I mean, there used to be mavericks within the Democratic and Republican parties that were very critical of Israel, but they were easy for AIPAC to pick off. They tended to be picked off. There was always, you always had this Charles Percy and everyone, boom, finally they were targeted, and they were easily picked up. This is very difficult. This is just, somebody like Abdul El Said. He's going to be very difficult to pick up. AIPAC has already thrown a huge amount at him, and AIPAC failed. And they're going to try in the general election, but fact is, no one's going to vote for Mike Rogers. I mean, he's just he's a kind of a George Bush Republican. But even the Republicans don't want the George Bush Republican, let alone the Democrats. It's not going to happen. Mike Rogers is not going to win in Michigan. So anyway, that's the kind of left-wing populist movement. I mean, as I say, I don't particularly care for it. It's it's not my thing, but it is understandable why it should have emerged, and why I think there will be more of this. Why Democrats are sick to death of the kind of Clintonism. Why they're sick to death of Chuck Schumer and even Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen Whitmer had also thrown her weight in against Abdul El Said, and she also was rejected. Anyway, so that's understandable. Now on the Republican side, you've got this emergence of the Tucker Carlson-led insurgency. So here's Tucker delivered this 100 minutes. It's well worth listening to that. It was a very articulately presented statement of principles, and I'll just show you quite a useful summary of his central points by Axios. And here you have, these are the 10 points. Tucker Carlson unveils 10-point manifesto, amid third-party speculation. And Tucker Carlson used a highly promoted live stream Wednesday to unveil a 10-point vision for America, defining the worldview of a breakaway MAGA faction increasingly at odds with President Trump. After vowing last month to help build a third party, Carlson fueled further speculation this weekend by hosting MAGA dissidents at his home in Maine, where they urged him to run in 2028. And then the former Fox News host stopped short of a formal launch, instead presenting the manifesto as the foundation for whatever comes next. A new political order, he said, could find all kinds of expressions. Carlson said any successor to America's faltering political system should begin with a shared understanding of what the country should be, which he distilled into 10 points. And then one, it should be fair. The same rules should apply to presidents, federal agents, and elites such as Jeffrey Epstein, whose impunity Carlson cast as emblematic of an Epstein class enriching itself through a corrupt system. This, of course, is quite a harsh statement, because obviously he's referring to this Epstein class as including his good friend, Donald Trump. So it was Trump who was a member of the Epstein class. So you know, the alienation between the two is now complete. And then Sovereign Carlson claimed Israel pushed the U.S. into the Iran war through bribery or threat or both, while describing foreign lobbying, corporate control of government, and high interest debt as forms of slavery. Yeah, so that that was very much against banks and usury, but of course very much against Wall Street. So that's part of Wall Street and the whole financialization of the economy. America should rebuild farming, manufacturing, and craftsmanship while rejecting an economy dominated by finance, real estate speculation, surveillance systems, and weapons. Beautiful. Carlson alleged that urban planners deliberately uglified American cities and portrayed brutalist architecture, graffiti, public drug use, and violent crime as deliberate attacks on the public. So that's not wholly uh, wrong. I mean, I think that there's no question. I mean, many cities have become ugly. I mean, Robert Moses almost like went out of his way to make New York City as ugly as it is. I mean, it was a beautiful city, but the Robert Moses era, given an extraordinary powers, led to the destruction of beautiful buildings. So it's a very reasonable point. Why have builders been allowed to build these monstrosities? You could easily build beautiful new buildings. Why build these horrific concrete monstrosities that everybody finds hideous and nobody would dream of living or working in? And anyway, then Tucker goes on. Carlson embraced RFK Jr.'s food agenda, calling for universal sobriety, and said widespread use of drugs such as Xanax, Adderall, and SSRIs had left Americans half-addled. Honest government officials should be punished for lying to citizens, and most classified records, including on the JFK assassination and 9/11, should be opened. This is a familiar theme of his. I actually don't think much of that. I tend to think most of this has already been open. Whatever there is to be found out, I think we know. I mean, I won't say that at 9/11. I reserve an open mind on 9/11, but I think on the JFK assassination, I don't know, we've had 63 years of this, and frankly, we've had lots and lots and lots of documentation that's been published, and most people haven't read this documentation. I mean, it's like just people talk about, oh, we need more documents. The people who say this haven't even read the Warren Commission report. But we got a more, and then they, we get additional documents, and we still don't have the proof that somehow the CIA was involved. Who knows what the actual theory is? The CIA was involved in the Kennedy assassination. I mean, people want to believe that, but I just don't think the evidence is there, because I don't quite see why the CIA would have wanted to kill him. But anyway, be that as it may, this is very much Tucker's thing, and it was also Trump's thing. Trump was also promising he was going to publish documents, and he has published documents on a number of these things. He has published things from the JFK assassination, but none of them have really added very much to what's already known, and what's already known is pretty conclusive. I mean, but okay, you can still demand more on this. Anyway, so that's that. And then we have optimistic. Carlson argued that having children is a biological imperative and the foundation of long-term thinking, while blaming aging and childless elites for policies that disregard future generations. Schools should teach how the physical world actually works, and what he called unchanging facts about human nature, including innate differences between men and women, which is, that's fairly conventional conservative thinking, and as is having children. All conservatives talk about that. It's low hanging fruit as far as conservatives are concerned. And then decent, the U.S. should apologize and pay restitutions for killing non-combatants, reverse Trump's Department of War, rebrand and stop funding allies that commit what Carlson called genocide, citing Israel. Well, that isn't going to happen. Obama tried doing a little bit of that in his goodwill tour, or his apology tour in 2009. That went down very badly in the United States. So I don't think any U.S. president is going to win any brownie points with the American public by going around apologizing. So that's not going to happen. And then Carlson called for halting immigration until the effects of AI become clearer, ending benefits for undocumented immigrants, and making English the sole language of federal documents and ballots, which is obviously sensible. Whether he can pull that off in the face of resistance by the judges, I don't know. We've seen how ferociously America's judges resisted Trump. So they would absolutely resist that. I mean, he'd just be better off. I mean, and I think that would be within the purview of an American president, just simply to say no one comes in. Absolutely none. No more immigration. No one gets in. And it's hard to see how any judge can challenge that, because it's obviously, it is within the jurisdiction of the president of the United States to decide who comes into the country. So, but once you start messing around with in individual policies, and what actually then falls within the responsibility of Congress, which is like what Obama tried to do when he started messing around with amnesty for the Dreamers and so on. That's doomed. The courts are going to rule against you on that. So anyway, so that's his 10 points, and then Axios goes on. Oh no, it doesn't go on. So that's the 10 points. So it's very general. It's a very general agenda, and but it's still interesting whether the third party is likely to generate more inductees. He's going to have to, in other words, it's the same problem that the way Trump had in 2015, 2016. Because first of all, the Republican Party establishment would have nothing to do with him. Absolutely, they refused. And he received practically no endorsements even when he had already wrapped up the nomination. In other words, the voters had already voted. He couldn't. He really couldn't get the Republican Party to support him, and so he started groping around for various foreign policy experts, because the people who are deemed to be foreign policy experts, they wouldn't have anything to do with Trump, and they were all against Trump. They all became never Trumpers, and that was unfortunate. That's when Trump hired people like, the idiot like George Papadopoulos, and there's, somebody can remind me, the fellow who was then the subject of the FBI surveillance. Yeah, then he was a big. He was in the oil business. He knew a great deal about the oil business, but he didn't know much about foreign policy. But I think Trump was just short of experts. But then when he finally took office, he surrounded himself really with a very familiar crew. All of the usual neocon Republican types, such as Mike Pompeo, H.R. McMaster. Then you had Rex Tillerson. He was. These are all very, very conventional types. So, if you're going to do a third party, you really want to have, you have to have a team of new and smart people. So we'll see whether he does it. I mean, there are there are certainly smart people around. It's a question of whether those smart people would join Carter Page. Somebody, Robert, Carter Page. That was the person I was trying to think of. Yeah, thank you, Robert. Yeah, I couldn't remember his name for a moment. Yeah, so Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. And Carter Page was actually a decent enough guy, but he didn't have enough experience and was therefore easy to pick off by malevolent figures such as James Comey. But anyway, we'll see what happens with. I'm always in favor of outsiders. I'm always in favor of insurgencies, and I'm in favor of populism. These political establishment types, basically feathering the nest and ready to stand for nothing. So I'm not aghast about what's going on in the Democratic Party, even though they're not really my cup of tea. But I'm glad the Democratic Party establishment is being challenged. So now, with this, we can transition to Europe, where we don't have any kind of political insurgencies. We don't have genuinely populist movements. And to the extent that we have them, they are subjected to a ferocious onslaught, such as the AfD in Germany, accused of essentially working with the Kremlin. So we have elections, important elections that are coming up in Europe. We have the elections in Germany in September. We have two important state elections in Germany. The eastern part of Germany, which is the AfD stronghold, and then of course we have the French presidential elections next year. And right away, what are we getting? We're getting this massive propaganda blitz, coming from obviously the security services, but security services who have been instructed to do this by the governments. So it's the governments have instructed the security services to leak material to the media about supposed Russian interference operations in Germany and in France. So first, let's look at first of all the situation in France. And here is the story from. Nope. Let me go back. Go back to this. Um, yeah. So now let me show you this. Here is the story in Politico. It says former PM. This is Gabriel Attal. Former PM joins list of French presidential candidates reportedly targeted by Russian interference because Jacques Attal, is it no, not Jacques Attal, Gabriel Attal, I'm thinking of Jacques Attali, is subjected to attack by Russia. And so here is this excited story that we have former Prime Minister Gabriel Attal is the latest in a string of French presidential candidates allegedly targeted by a Russian disinformation campaign. Attal, the candidate of President Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party, said on Thursday he had been a victim of an electoral interference attempt originating from Russia and that he expected such destabilization efforts to increase ahead of France's April 2027 election. Viginum, the country's agency for fighting online disinformation, so it's a country's agency, so it's an agency of the government. Apparently, you then create these government agencies whose responsibility is for fighting online disinformation. Confirmed it had detected the operation against Attal and attributed it with a high level of confidence. A high level of confidence. This is always great when the intelligence services declare something to be with high level of confidence. We have very high level. It's super high to pro-Russian disinformation tactics. And then former French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, who is also running for president, was the first to be reportedly targeted last week before center-left parliamentarian Raphael Glucksmann. We talked about him on Tuesday. He's the son of André Glucksmann, that fraudulent quote philosopher unquote, who is expected to run, shared that he had been targeted by a Russian operation on Monday. Attal said the smear campaign against him consisted of falsified news reports about his health and policy proposals, which copied the branding of French news outlets. Russia wants to steal the election from the French. 2024 report from the Viginum identified similar pro-Russian campaign known as Matryoshka, which involved Russian news and media reports impersonating well-known French outlets and then combating foreign interference and protecting our democratic framework are a priority. Current Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu posted online on Wednesday several instances of foreign interference targeting candidates have already been detected, and in each case, the individuals were immediately notified. And here is a tweet sent out by Gabriel Attal. The bigger it is, the more the Kremlin thinks it will slip by. The reality, whether openly through Madame Fedorova, we've already discussed at some length, or via anonymous accounts, they are multiplying the interferences. France's responsibility in this context is to defend its democracy. Now, what's immediately striking about this is the staggering lack of any kind of originality. I mean, these people, the French, and we'll come to Germany in a moment. The French and German, they're just playing the same playbook that they've done in every election since 2016. Russian interference. I mean, we've got no ideas. We don't have any program. We don't have any agenda. We don't have any policies of how to improve life for ordinary Frenchmen. What do we have? Well, we have Russia. We can just keep talking about Russia. So I don't have anything to say other than, well, the Russians are out to get me. Why are the Russians out to get me? Well, because I'm tougher on Russia than anyone else. Well, everyone in France is tough on Russia. I mean, why would they be out to get you? I mean, so it's like, well, that's all they have. It says, well, Russia is out to get me, and then because this is really how the political establishments in Europe just retain their power. You're going to say, well, we're being challenged. What do we do about it? Well, we just cancel an election as we did in Romania, and then well, what else can we do? Well, we can just arrest opposition people. We did that in Moldova. We just told um, the president of Moldova, Maya Sandu, well, we just told her, hey, you're going to lose this election. And if you lose this election, you're going to really embarrass us. So what you need to do is to put in prison all of your political opposition and say that they're working for Russia. And that's why you had to put them in prison. And Maya Sandu did that, and Maya Sandu then won the election. They did that, in Armenia. Again, the boy Pashinyan was in trouble. So what do we do? Well, Russia. So there's no originality here. It's the same thing. Oh well, it's Russia. Um, but the remarkable thing is, France has a lot of problems, to say the least. And the French have been already expressing their discontent for many years. We have, whether it was the yellow vest, whether it's the Macron's horrific poll numbers, worse than any French president in living memory, is his horrific poll numbers. But rather than address that, why is Macron so detested in France? Well, let's just talk about Russia. So last week we talked about how all the only thing that the French media and the French intellectual, the public intellectuals, were talking about was Zhenya Fedorova, was a Russian commentator living in France. That's what talking about. We're not talking about Fedorova, or at least not as much. We're going to talk about Russian interference, which is quite remarkable, and it's true in this case of France and Germany, is how little you find by way of actual evidence of this Russian interference. And you ask, well, please, can you show us this Russian interference? Where is it? Well, it's highly classified. It's too classified to like to do. That's a bit of a problem. And so when you have this, well, the French intelligence says it's they can speak with very high confidence, very, very high confidence. Well, that's when you're being bullshit, because that, of course, reminds you of Theresa May in the UK, who told us that the Skripals had been poisoned, and it was highly likely that the Russians were behind it. It was highly likely. We never saw the evidence for this, but it was just highly likely that the Russians were behind it, even though, given the case that was presented, it was highly unlikely that the Russians were behind it, or that there was ever a Novichok poisoning. I mean, we don't want to go through that now, but it was never likely that they were the victims of a Novichok poisoning. But anyway, let's go back to France, the land of Cartesian logic, the relentless Cartesian philosophy. And here's the Radio France International. Ex-French PM Attal targeted by Russian interference. And again, the same thing, blah, blah, blah. The operation was described by a security source as low visibility with only a few thousand views, and was not presented as direct hacking of Attal's personal devices, but rather as part of a broader disinformation campaign. Oh, that's good. And then this disclosure comes weeks after similar alerts involving other potential contenders. In late July, former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, a declared 2027 candidate, was targeted by the pro Russian network Storm 1516 with false claims about his health in what a security source talking to AFP called the first such operation against a French presidential hopeful. And then days later, a socialist MEP, Glucksmann, said the SGDSN had informed him that he too was the target of a Storm 1516 operation directly run by the GRU. So Viginum, the state digital interference monitoring service, under the SGDSN, this is the French Security Services, documented 4 foreign interference operations during March 2016 municipal elections, 2 of them attributed to known pro-Russian actors, including Storm 1516. Anyway, and then it goes on, and then here we have Le Monde, same thing. But this fabricated content about Gabriel Attal appeared on X in posts impersonating legitimate French media outlets and falsely claiming that Attal had Parkinson's disease or supported a more favorable policy towards squatters. A source close to Attal said the attack was likely motivated by his commitment to Ukraine after Russia launched its full scale. But this is very strange because all French men and French women are intensely pro-Ukraine and intensely anti-Russia. So it's still not clear why would they pick on Attal, who has no chance whatever of winning the presidency. But somehow, well, I'm more pro-Ukraine than you are, so I get more attacks from Russia than you do. And anyway, it goes on here that, and here's the insider. This is one of these shady outfits, funded by Khodorkovsky, funded by Soros. Here we have the Russia's Matryoshka, bot network targets Macron's political heir ahead of France's 2027 election. And then he has the Russian Matryoshka bot network has launched a disinformation campaign targeting Gabriel. Now, they use this term Matryoshka, which sounds very fancy. You can say, Russian intelligence people, said down, we got the Russian Matryoshka. We have a Matryoshka campaign. Matryoshka is just a fancy word for the Russian nesting dolls. You remember those Russian nesting dolls? You take one, you unscrew it, you take out, and an identical Russian doll comes out, then you unscrew that, and then another one comes out, and so on. It's a very Russian thing, and then there's a Russian nesting dolls, but we call them Matryoshka because that's the way the Russians call it. Anyway, so here's this story, and the videos are started to resemble reports from major French news outlets. And then Attal said that due to Islam's many prohibitions, there are actually more. Oh, sorry, hold on, let me just go back this a bit. The videos are styled, and so, however, the scandal in question differs from message to message. So what they do, this is what they're claiming. Attal said, and then they're saying Attal didn't say that. Attal said that due to Islam's many prohibitions, there are actually more homosexuals among Muslims than in any other religious group. In response to the made-up quote, the bot campaign invented the following response from this rector of the Grand Mosque of Paris. An openly gay man is mistaking his wishes for reality. Perhaps Mr. Attal would like there to be many perverts like himself among Muslims, but that is not actually the case. So according to this, apparently none of it is true. No one said anything. And then the same thing, the campaign claims that the politician's father, Yves Attal, died of cocaine overdose in 2015, and that Adal himself suffers from drug addiction. And uh, and then it goes on. And Atal is falsely claimed to have Parkinson's disease, like the American actor Michael J. Fox. According to the bots, this was confirmed by a leak from Paris's PT, whatever, of this hospital after hackers supposedly breached its database and published 3% of its records, which appear to include Atal's medical file. And so again, false quote and so on. And then the campaign claims that Atal oversees candidate selections at the Sciences Po Institute of Political Studies. And then Atal is falsely portrayed as calling for undocumented migrants not to be evicted from vacant homes and describing the influx of migrants from Morocco into Spain as a great blessing. Anyway, the campaign also claims that Atal's father's foundation has become one of the largest private sponsors of the Israeli army, transferring 24 million euros in 2025, and so on. And then, anyway, so anyway, anyway, so it goes on. And then the inside, this is the explanation of the insider. The bots use some real facts as a framework for their fabrications. Atal is indeed openly gay and was in a civil partnership with politician Stéphane Séjourné for many years. As education minister in 2023, he did ban the traditional Muslim abaya in French schools, and the anti-corruption organization Anticor did lose its accreditation in 2023, but as a result of a court ruling with no connection whatever to Atal's father's foundation. And then in addition, Atal's father did die in 2015, but there's no evidence to support the claims he died of an overdose, nor is there any evidence that Gabriel Attal has Parkinson's disease, suffers from drug addiction, or made the statements about migrants attributed to him. So all of this is remarkably uninteresting, except for the fact that this kind of rumors that you get all the time at election time, and of course all the time on social media, on all social media, not just on X, but all social media, is somehow elevated to the status of dark, sinister Russian plot to get Gabriel Attal. But this is really how these things are done. And so, in order to whip up this hysteria about Russian interference. But anyway, but something very similar is going on in Germany. And because, as I say, you've got the elections are coming up next month. And in fact, I think it's in about 4 weeks on Sunday. These are two state elections. The AfD is expected to do well, and this is the time that customarily in Germany you launch attacks and claim that the AfD, they're all a bunch of Nazis, or alternatively, they're all working for Putin. And so here's a news conference the other day, or maybe it was actually, I think it was yesterday, a news conference in Germany at the Foreign Office, and here's a question to this says, according to reports, the Russian disinformation campaign appears to be significantly expanding even now before the state elections. What is the federal government doing about it? Notice how the journalists in Germany are very much like journalists everywhere else. Their minds have been entirely shaped by the mainstream narrative, unquestioning accepting mainstream narrative that Russia is indeed waging this disinformation campaign, and that the government isn't doing enough to combat it. So none of them is saying, hey, how about you address some of Germany's really serious problems? And, and by the way, before you start claiming all kinds of things about what Russia is up to. How about you present us with some evidence that actually points to this a Russian government inspired campaign? But instead of that, hey, what are you doing? Because we assume that it's absolutely true that there is such a thing as Russian disinformation. What are you doing to combat this Russian disinformation? This is exactly the same kinds of questions that are posed to whoever is the NATO Secretary General. Hey, Russia's really, really threatening us. What's NATO doing about this Russian threat? Um, anyway, so this was the question. And then here we have Kaminsky. Now he's from the Ministry of Interior, and of course he again uses the term matryoshka. Exactly. There's a lot of talk right now about this campaign called matryoshka. They called this campaign. This matryoshka was invented in the West. There was no one had this is all invented, like the Gerasimov doctrine. So you say, oh, so is there a doctrine that Gerasimov came up with? No, he never came up with. This term is coined in the West, and then they say, oh, there is, and then you're led to believe that there's something called the Gerasimov doctrine. So there's matryoshka. Well, they invented this because of this, the Russian dolls. Oh, that sounds good. Oh, yeah, the matryoshka. It's a campaign where various social media users were able to post short videos in English and other languages, but very little, if any, in German. These videos relate to the upcoming state elections and contain accusations of corruption, addiction, populism, cronyism, anti-Semitism against some of the candidates. We at the Interior Ministry and the federal government are, of course, monitoring this campaign. However, it's important to note that this campaign isn't currently achieving a very large reach online. This isn't a reason to let our guard down. Of course, it's a serious disinformation campaign, but the reach is limited. So obviously, the journalists were not very happy about this because they want to be persuaded that the reach is very severe, and what are you doing about it? The Russians are everywhere. Well, then the question is, well, to what extent does the Foreign Office have knowledge that the Russian leadership is attempting to influence the state elections through disinformation? I mean, talk about leading questions. To what extent does the Foreign Office have knowledge that the Russian leadership is attempting to influence the state elections through disinformation? So then this Auswärtige Amt, the foreign ministry, they said, well, we see, of course, that Russia is attempting to exert influence here in Germany every day in some way or another through various hybrid means in a manner that seeks to undermine our democracy, erode trust in politics and politicians, and so on. I'm not quite sure why we should have trust in democracy, trust in politics as a politician, but okay. We absolutely need as much trust as we can get. In that sense, there is this constant ongoing attack from Russia, which is state-sanctioned and orchestrated. This is not a statement about the specific case, but it is perfectly clear to us that we must be aware of this situation. And then here is the Financial Times. Today, Russia targets MAGA influencers ahead of German state vote. So you have to savor this headline because, you look at it and any casual reader, and again, notice in the sub, the Matryoshka campaign, everybody keep ramming it down everyone's throat. Matryoshka. Oh, what's Matryoshka? Oh, it's the Russian dolls. Can I have a Russian doll? The Matryoshka campaign is seeking to amplify inflammatory English language posts. So right away, this becomes very puzzling. You say, well, whoa, MAGA, what's MAGA got to do with the AFD? I mean, the one link between MAGA and the AFD was an attempt on the part of Elon Musk to somehow intervene in the in Germany's campaign before the general election, he tried to boost the AfD. So he had a lengthy interview with Alice Weidel, who heads the AfD in the Bundestag, and the interview was a big bore, because Weidel decided to play along with Musk and try to sound like a very conventional American conservative. Well, that was, of course, really boring, and nobody really wants to hear that. And it was a dud. It was a dud all around. It was a dud for Musk. It was a dud for X, and it was a dud for Vidal. But here, but the Financial Times is coming like, oh, there's the MAGA. Then you think about, well, what's the connection with MAGA and the AfD? And so the logic here is quite interesting, because they have to deal with this problem that these messages from Russia are all coming in English. And you think, well, that's very odd. I mean, here because if the Russians are trying to swing an election in Germany for the AfD, then why are they sending messages in English? And then the FD now gets into this explanation. Oh, well, that's because the Russians are trying to influence the Americans, the American MAGA. But even then, it's well, why would they want to influence Americans in for a German election? Ah, well, that's because this it's those American voices are going to be relayed back into Germany, and then they will have a lot of influence. Well, that's very odd. Why would they have a lot of influence? Because most Germans, understandably, get their news from German language sources. They don't sit there getting their news by watching Fox News and that or Tucker Carlson Network or Gaggle or anything else. But that's we're in this world. This is the wilderness of mirrors. Uh, One other thing that which I think is quite strange about this is that, according to the polls, I mean, the AfD is far ahead. I mean, these races are not competitive. I mean, they're just way ahead of the everyone else. So, in such a case, why would Russia intervene in an election in which their preferred candidate, even assuming that that's the case, that the AfD is their preferred candidate, but why would they intervene when any interference on the part of Russia will immediately be seized upon and wrapped around the necks of the AfD? I mean, if they're already doing well, then leave well alone and just focus on interference on wherever, or better still, focus on winning the war in Ukraine or any other useful activity. Why would you be interfering in an election in Germany, which is already going well for your preferred candidate? But we're in the wilderness of mirrors now. No one thinks logically. Anyway, let's just look at this brilliant article in the FT. And so here says, Russia has significantly expanded an online disinformation campaign ahead of next month's election in the German state of Saxony-Anhalt, and appears to have targeted unwitting MAGA-aligned social media users in the US to amplify false claims. The tactic, which relies on English language posts being spread on platforms including Elon Musk's X, is intended to help propel far-right AfD to power. It marks a departure from previous Russian attempts to influence German elections, which focus more on German audiences, which is kind of what you would expect. And particularly, as I say, the last time, X intervened in the German election was a dud, and it really didn't work at all well for the AfD. So anyway, this goes on, this wilderness of mirrors, and German intelligence and security agencies say they have been tracking a sharp increase in Russian interference since June. Russian state actors are behind efforts to discredit mainstream local politicians by spreading sexual smears and corruption allegations as part of the latest iteration of the Matryoshka influence operation. Okay, got it? Matryoshka. The smear campaign in Saxony-Anhalt is notable for its brutality and multi-layered approach. Fake stories about mainstream politicians accuse them of pedophilia, sexual assault, and corruption. So far, more than 100 videos have been logged by German officials as part of the campaign. They are 100 videos. Who was engaging in all this sexual assault and pedophilia? I mean, it's 100 videos. I mean, these Germans seem to have been quite busy. Anyway, they are slickly produced and purport to be made by a reputable media outlet such as German state broadcaster ARD or the BBC. They also stand out because they are almost entirely in English, with German officials, that believes a single new, more cunning approach by Russian intelligence actors. Russian propagandists are increasingly seeking to use a multi-layered approach to launder their disinformation through easily manipulable users of social media networks, in particular those on X. The assessment of the German authorities is that the campaign's initial target audience is not Germany, but the US, where MAGA supporters and other right-wing users of X have become avid consumers of narratives portraying Europe as being in societal decline and liberal political elites as weak. Well, that may be the case, but you're still thinking, okay, well, how does that help, an election campaign, a state election campaign, not even a federal, a state election campaign in Saxony-Anhalt? I mean, I don't even know who these MAGA influencers are who could take, I don't know, to be honest, I don't know MAGA influencers who are particularly interested in the doings of German local politicians. I mean, if you ask any MAGA person, can you name a German politician? They would probably be hard put to name Friedrich Merz. Okay, they'll remain is the chancellor. But that's about it. The whole idea that they actually take a great interest in Saxony-Anhalt and know the sexual proclivities of some nameless politicians in Saxony-Anhalt. I mean, it's quite amusing. But anyway, this story goes on. So yeah, and then officials argue that changes to X under Musk have made such communities a more effective vector. Ooh, a vector. That's a very fancy word. That's one of those one of those big words, which that only really educated people use. Effective vector. It's you could have used matrix. Even a matrix. That's an even fancier word. More effective vector for amplifying Russian disinformation back into Germany. Well, I suppose if voters in the eastern part of Germany are particularly interested in what people in America are saying, and I have my doubts that they have any real interest, any more than I think people in America have any particular interest in what people in Eastern Germany are saying. Anyway, it says the campaign's apparent aim is to persuade influential US-based non-German speaking X-users to amplify realistic-looking but fabricated stories about Germany until they gain enough traction to be echoed by local politicians or picked up by mainstream German media. So they're targeting these Americans, and it's dubious whether they have the interest, so that these Americans amplify something that they have no interest in, whatever. And then once they amplify, it's going to be relayed back into Eastern Germany. And then once they're relayed back into Germany, they get traction. They will get traction, lots and lots of traction. And then once they get traction, they get echoed by local politicians. And once they get echoed by local politicians, this will influence voters. Will do, I'm not sure. They're going to vote for the AFD. I'm not sure why, but that's the logic. Even if German media report the claims only to debunk them, officials say doing so still risks amplifying the allegations by exposing them to a wider audience. So don't even report it. That's the main thing. Don't report it. It'll help the AFD. The Russians are looking at more subtle but effective ways to, quote, poison, unquote, news narratives, one European intelligence official said. I wish we would, sometimes when they did that, they would tell us, well, this European intelligence official, for which intelligence service does he work? For voters already skeptical of the political establishment, simply hearing the allegations repeated, even in the context of a fact check or debunking, can be enough to reinforce and spread them. A German Interior Ministry spokesperson said the campaign involved mostly English language videos posted on social media, making allegations of corruption, addiction, populism, nepotism. Because, of course, in Germany, there's no corruption, no addiction, no populism, no nepotism, and no anti-Semitism. We in Germany have a very good country here. We believe in democracy, freedom, and values. We are part of NATO. Anti-Semitism against candidates in the state election. We are keeping a close eye on this campaign, the spokesperson said. So that's giving you a sense of the story in the German election. But before we leave the the subject of this of Germany, I want to now one more story, one further story about Germany, which you may have missed. I mean, it was a story that broke today, that there was a drone found in Leipzig, and this drone has been attributed to Russia. So it's not immediately clear from all the excited stories what the accusation is. What Germany sent this drone to launched a drone attack onto Germany, but nonetheless, that was. I'm just looking before I go on. Let me just see if I can I can refresh this page, because I get the sense that this the YouTube notes, the YouTube chat is not being refreshed. So I'm going to refresh this page. I will disappear for a short while, and then I will be back. So just bear with me for a couple of seconds. Okay, so I've refreshed the page, and I don't know. I was hoping to be able to see all of the live chats, but I'm not really seeing them. Anyway, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah. So anyway, the shout out to the chat. Yes, that was, yeah. For some reason it was odd. I didn't see the like the chat hadn't refreshed. In fact, nothing had refreshed. Anyway, I want to just then take a look at this story in from Leipzig about the drone. And here, let me just have that. The Leipzig. Here's the story in Politico. It says Leipzig drone incident fuels fears of Russian election meddling. So that's also election meddling, because we'd already. I thought it was all about these attacking, calling people pedophiles and gay and whatever else. But apparently, it's getting worse. They're also launching drones in order to interfere in the German election. It says the unmanned vehicle packed with explosives has added ahead of key regional races. And then drone packed with explosives discovered at Leipzig is interference in upcoming elections, in which far-right politicians have campaigned on fears of escalation with Moscow. The drone found at strategic airport served Ukrainian and NATO aircraft, as well as a major DHL logistics hub, is being seen as evidence of a potential act by foreign powers, said German Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt. And then the Kremlin has been accused of seeking to sway September's election in Saxony-Anhalt and Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. And then it goes on. Here's Martin Gieser, the foreign ministry spokesman, says, we do, of course, see the Russian attempts every day in one way or another through hybrid means of various measures to exert influence here in Germany in a manner that seeks to undermine our democracy and erode trust in politics and politicians. And then Russian disinformation campaigns have portrayed German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and his government as warmongers. Well, what the hell else are they? They are exactly that. They're warmongers. I mean, you don't need a Russian campaign to tell you that. They aim to undermine the already unpopular chancellor and boost Russia-friendly forces such as the AfD and the far-left Zara Wagenknecht alliance, both of which are strong in Eastern Germany. And then now they're quoting some guy, the German Council on Foreign Relations, Stefan Meister, says the state elections in Saxony-Anhalt and Eastern Germany are, of course, a major target of Russian influence because these are pivotal elections in the heart of Europe. Every election is always pivotal. He said that it's too early to attribute the explosive-laden drone to Russia, as investigations are still going, but he added that Moscow is clearly waging a broad hybrid campaign targeting the region ahead of next month's votes. This should be the first time right-wing populists come to power, and with that, the chancellor might even fall, or at the very least, the coalition would be severely weakened, and a pro-Russian party would come to power in one of the federal states. And then this is a major campaign underway on the Russian side to influence these elections in favor of the AfD and the BSW. And then it says, they're quoting again this German Alexander Dobrindt. He said, we can't rule out the possibility that the foreign powers are behind this. So this is where, you first say you can't rule it out. And then, of course, suddenly it just becomes accepted that it's Russia. So that's well, we can't rule it out. We don't have any evidence, but we might as well just go with it and just keep saying it's Russia. Then it goes on that Dobrin stopped short of naming Russia specifically. And then against Leipzig, and then Armin Schuster, Minister for Interior for Saxony, told ZDF that the incident represented a new threat level. Without wanting to preempt the investigation, I'm now going to preempt the investigation. I would describe this as a suspected attack scenario because this is the first time we've had a drone that was loaded with explosives. That's new. And then an airport worker found the drone on Tuesday night. Officers disarmed the device by removing its detonator, which had failed to go off. And then, in a separate incident at the same airport, another flying object struck a DHL cargo aircraft as it was being diverted away from the airport after the explosive laden drone was found. Now, there are right away a number of very odd aspects to this story. First of all, nobody actually witnessed this drone entering the airport. They say this explosive laden drone, but it seemed to have detected no evidence that it detected this apparent attack on an airport. You would have thought an airport would have quite detectors, detectors, aircraft detectors, there are strong missile detectors, and then drone detectors. So you would have thought that, of all places, I mean, if this is a drone found in a kindergarten, you say, well, nobody detected it in the kindergarten, but you'd have thought when you find it in an airport, it was missed. All of the anti air detectors were off. Nobody noticed nothing. So, so that's already an odd aspect to it. Then they say, well, if it was laden with explosives, so it comes into the airport, yet for some mysterious reason, it doesn't go off. Why would it not go off? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's you got all these explosives on the drone, just didn't go off. And then an officer was on hand to dismember it. Well, that's handy. Okay, so nobody detected it coming in. When it came in, it didn't explode. And then and there was plenty of time apparently for an engineer to come along and to dismember the drone. Well, that's handy. Now, you think, well, why would Russia be involved in all of this? I mean, by their own story, this is an important NATO hub. What do they? What do you do at NATO hubs? Well, at NATO hubs, you load up the planes with lots and lots of stuff, lots of heading for Ukraine. Most of what they do is to load the planes up with stuff that you send to Ukraine: explosives, drones, missiles, artillery shells, obviously, rocket propelled grenades, and all the rest of it, HIMARS, everything else. You just stuff it all into these planes, and then you send them on their way to Ukraine. So there might not be such a great mystery as to why there should suddenly have been found a drone lying around on an airport tarmac. And some security guards say, "What the hell's that lying over there?" That's like in Naked Gun 2.5. That's a pretty nice clock. I think I'll keep it. Apparently they found it. They said, "Oh, well, this looks cool." And then right away they attribute this to yes, Russia. Obviously, Russia sent this to Leipzig. Why? What exactly would they accomplish by sending one drone to Leipzig? It does. It doesn't really make a great deal of sense. But anyway, all you need to do, come along and say, "Oh yeah, Russia's doing this. This is all part of this Russian campaign." And what's the purpose of this campaign? Well, the purpose obviously is to help the AfD. So everything is, earlier we were looking at those stories. Oh, you're making allegations, pedophilia, I don't know, orgies or whatever it is, German local politicians are getting involved in. So you bring that up. Now, apparently, it's the Russians are sending drones to Leipzig in order to help the AFD. Anyway, just a little more on this, and so here we have the Guardian analysis. The Leipzig drone bomb marks a dangerous escalation for Europe. Initial evidence suggests the aerial drone found near Ukrainian cargo planes at German airport came from Russia. The armed drone found at Leipzig airport on Wednesday may not have exploded, but the fact that it got inside the perimeter close to Ukrainian cargo planes, well, then so Ukrainian cargo planes, well, by the very fact that it was near Ukrainian cargo planes might explain it. They were they're packing the planes, and you're shoving your drone into a cargo plane, and then somebody dropped it, and then somebody then picked it up. Hey, this is a pretty cool cool clock. This. And then somebody says, intended for Russia. Yeah, I mean, that could well be what this drone was. It's not a Russian drone, but it was precisely intended for Russia. Anyway, just a little more, the Guardian imbecility, and though the identity of the culprits is unknown, we will assume that it was Ivan Ivan Popov, the ubiquitous Russians. The initial evidence points firmly towards a Russian orchestrated plot. It is the first time that a drone with explosives had been found in Europe, far from the Ukrainian border. So, photographs published by German newspapers show a quadcopter, a design familiar from the Ukrainian war, with a package attached. It lies a few meters short of a Ukrainian Antonov cargo plane with its easily identifiable yellow and blue trim livery. Police from the German state of Saxony confirmed that the drone was carrying an unknown explosive device, discovered by an employee in the secure cargo flight operation area near the airport's southern runway. German media reported the attached bomb was made of Petten and Semtex plastic explosive, Lockerbie. And then the local newspaper said the police discovered as much as 800 grams of explosive. That doesn't sound like an awful lot, to be honest, but what do I know? This would be enough to do considerable damage to a plane, according to Trevor Lawrence. And this is, I'm confused. They're launching an attack against a plane, a big cargo plane. Those cargo planes are big. And you've got 800 grams of explosive. What kind of damage can it do to a plane? I mean, I don't think it's going to do very much damage. Or do they mean that can do a lot of damage to a plane? I mean, if it goes off inside a plane, that presumably would do a lot of damage. But if it's going to go off inside a plane, then who is behind this? The presence of this drone. This would be no. According to Trevor, explosive expert with Cranfield University, not least because airplane bodies are ridiculously thin, often only 3 millimeters of aluminum. So you're going to launch an attack from, I don't know, somewhere deep inside Russia, all the way to Leipzig, and you're calculating that we can do a lot of damage to this plane. Well, if you're going to do damage to planes, why not just hit the damn bloody thing in Ukraine rather than launching an attack on Leipzig? I mean, it's a lot easier to damage Ukrainian cargo planes in Ukraine. But hey, this is the wilderness of mirrors. But I mean, just to reiterate the point that I started with this. This all we get here in the European media is this Russia, 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 and that's what I mean. The difference between America, where you may not like the populist right, you may not like the populist left, but at least there's some ways to challenge the imbecility that prevails with at the level of the political establishment. Here, there just isn't. Here, what did we do last time? We did Russia. What did we do the time before that? We did Russia. What about the time before that? Russia. We've been doing Russia, Russia, Russia now since 2015, more than 10 years. And we're going to keep doing them because we just don't have any ideas to do anything else. Anyway, let's go to our locals page. This is where the Gaggle locals community comes with ideas and opinions and questions and comments. And this is what I enjoy most. This is my favorite part of the live stream, when I'm addressing the comments of our Gagglers. So it's a very talented community, as I always say, and I say to the YouTubers that please, if you want to raise questions with me, if you want to comment, if you want to criticize anything I say, challenge anything I say, please join our locals community. Very easy to do. The Gaggle.locals.com. It's very well worth your while. And you always learn something. I'm always learning because it's a fantastic, it's such a news source. So there's always new material that's posted there, and it's always very stimulating, always very enjoyable. So the Gaggle.locals.com. Anyway, first question is from our one of our most prolific posters, Danaki, who says, do you think Burnham's Labour will attempt to furtively reinsert the UK into the EU? And what do you see the chances of success being? Well, I think he will try to do that, as did Keir Starmer. I think that's almost a certainty. I don't think it will be very successful because I don't see that British public opinion has changed on the issue of the EU. The people who are still fervently pro-EU, fervently Europhile, fervently Remainers, if we can call them that, is that's the media elites who still haven't got over the pain of leaving the EU. And so they continue to bang the drum for return. Let's have another referendum and so on. So, but I don't think a referendum would work because I think it'll go against the Remainers, just as the one did in 2016. And in fact, every vote subsequent to that, whether it was the 2019 the European Parliament of 2019 and the general election of 2019, all of them confirmed the 2016 referendum result. So I don't think a referendum will work. What I think he will try to do is to move Britain closer in alliance with the EU. In other words, the various regulations and rules of the EU will be adopted by the UK. The problem with doing that is that it makes really very little sense, because if you're going to be outside of the EU and you're going to be adopting the rules and regulations of the EU, then you're a hell of a lot, you're much worse off than you were before, because whatever else you may have thought about the EU, at least you had some say. As long as you were in the EU, you had some say in the formulation of the rules and regulations of the EU. But if you're outside of it, you have no say in the rules and regulations. You're just going to adopt EU standards that have been formulated by someone else. So that's going to be the worst of all worlds. You're going to be a de facto member of the EU without actually having any say in EU policy. and I think that's almost certainly the way not Starmer, Burnham is going to go, and it'll be the worst of all worlds. I think that's what, and I think it's not going to go down very well for that very reason. Hey, we're adopting EU standards, but we have no say in the formulation of these EU standards. And you're still going to have all of the immigration problems that Ursula von der Leyen is now going to impose on the UK. Not that the UK has done a particularly good job of dealing with the issue of immigration, but here you have the bad policies of the UK compounded by the appalling policies of the EU. So I think, yeah, I think he is going to move towards the EU. I think it's going to be the worst of all worlds, and I don't think it's going to be very successful, precisely because of that. But he can't call a new referendum, because a new referendum, which is will I think would be the same as the other referendum, which is going to go against the EU. Anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. And then Cynthia, good friend Cynthia. Cynthia, of course, as I always say, and I say it particularly to the YouTubers and those who are thinking about joining the Gaggle locals community. Cynthia is the film scholar, film expert, and film critic of the Gaggle. So when you join the Gaggle locals community, you derive not only the benefits of the live stream, but of course you derive the even greater benefits of Cynthia's very learned, very informed, very scholarly, and always fascinating cinematic commentary. And they always come accompanying our weekly film screenings. We have them on Monday night, but they're posted on the Gaggle locals page, and you can see them really anytime. You can just go back in our archives and watch any movies that we have screened. And we had this political film last week. We had Advise and Consent. And then this week we had a film, The Next Generation, which was about Lyndon Johnson and the path to war. And it was about the gradual deterioration of the Johnson presidency, which began on a high and hopeful note and ended in a very dismal, depressed, failed state as a result of Vietnam. It's a very interesting film, well worth seeing. It's a kind of a dramatized documentary of I guess the rise and decline of the Johnson administration. Very well acted, very well made, and of course, when you watch, you can enjoy Cynthia's really, really insightful commentary and very well informed commentary. So please, thegaggle.locals.com. Anyway, Cynthia writes today, Scott Horton notes Hillary Clinton pushed Obama into the 2011 NATO war in Libya. Yes, absolutely. Shattering the Sahel. Yes. After Gaddafi fell, Tuareg fighters carried weapons into Mali. Yes. Fueling a separatist revolt. Yep, which we still have today. Libya's jihadi victors then seized the chaos, pushing south and helping trigger the 2012 coup that crushed democracy. By 2020, Mali's new regime joined Burkina Faso and Niger, expelled US and French forces, and turned to Russia's Wagner Group for security. Yup, absolutely. And then Cynthia goes on. Horton argues the US, via Ukraine, now wage a proxy war against this pro-Russia alliance, with Ukraine acting as a Western gun for hire by supplying the FPV drones to Al-Qaeda-linked militants. The pattern mirrors Syria, where US, UK backed jihadists later battled Russia in Ukraine. After the CIA rebuilt Ukraine's spy network in 2014, insiders warned the New York Times that they had helped create a global rogue entity. Lacking local support, the West uses brute force, Ukrainian drones, and Al Qaeda to strike Mali. Absolutely right. And this is all exactly correct. Yes, the overthrow of Gaddafi was indeed masterminded by this horrible Harridan trio in the Obama administration. Of course, the head Harridan was Hillary Clinton, but she was joined by the lesser Harridans, which was Susan Rice and Samantha Power. They cooked up the whole scenario for Libya because Hillary Clinton was convinced that this great win, the overthrow of Gaddafi, would be her calling card. You know, she was going to absolutely ride into town as the woman who got rid of Gaddafi. This was she got this advice from her pal Sidney Blumenthal, and of course the the guy whose name always escapes me, who was the national security advisor to Biden, who used to work for her at that time, and they really thought, "Hey, this is going to be your big thing. You're gonna come up with this thing. You got rid of Gaddafi. People remember him from the Pan Am downing, and you will be a great hero." And that's why the famous scene, you know, we came, we saw, he died, and she cackled with glee. And of course, it was a complete and horrific disaster. And so, yes, naturally, you know, when you're thinking in such a superficial, shallow, stupid way, which is what Hillary Clinton is, you know, it's a redundancy. That's the only way Hillary Clinton knows how to think. You don't think about the consequences. She didn't think about the consequences of all these weapons from Libya that were then transferred to Syria to help fuel the war against Assad in Syria. And of course, she didn't think about the wider consequences in the Sahel, because that indeed did fuel the jihadis in the Sahel, and you said Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and you know, and they were of course accompanied, particularly in Mali, by the Tuaregs, and it was obviously an absolute catastrophe. And you know, they turned to America and the French for help to deal with these jihadis and the Tuaregs, but they had their own agenda. They helped as little to fight the jihadis as they helped Syria to fight the jihadis, as they helped Iraq to fight the jihadis, which means that they didn't. They helped. They were on the side of the jihadis, as again that the famous guy, who's the name of the guy, well, the national security advisor to Biden, who was working for Hillary Clinton, who said that Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria. You know, we're fighting on the same side as Al Qaeda, and he was happy about this. You know, we're on the same side as Al Qaeda because our real enemy is Bashar al-Assad, just like our real enemy is Gaddafi, even though both Assad and Gaddafi were actually fighting to crush Islamism. And then by removing Assad, removing Gaddafi, you fueled Islamism. But anyway, so Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, so we're not getting any help from the Americans. We're not getting any help from the French. In fact, they're making things worse. With every day that they're, quote, helping us, the situation is deteriorating. So that's why they turn to Russia for help. And then this is part, and you're absolutely right, this is part of this Ukrainian strategy, which means that they're trying to make themselves as useful to the West as possible. They moved in to the Sahel, particularly in Mali, to fight essentially the Russians. So in other words, they were actually siding with the Tuaregs. They were providing support to the Tuaregs in Mali, with not because they care one jot for the Tuaregs or they cared for the Islamists, but they were fighting against Russia. And so for Americans and of course Europeans who were thinking, hey, Russia is exerting its influence. Russia is becoming um, more powerful in our own backyard. West Africa is supposed to be our backyard, and Russia is suddenly becoming powerful. Ukraine was saying, yeah, look, we're fighting against Russia on your behalf. And so that's exactly what they're doing. They're helping the Tuaregs for the one reason only, to fight against Russia. So the Ukrainians are trying to make themselves useful there, and of course they've done the same thing in Iraq, where again they've been. This is the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government has said that that here we're getting this attacks from Ukrainians. Ukrainians are attacking Iran-linked militia. Iran. Ukrainians are here. We never invited the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are here. They're fighting. They're targeting Iran-linked militia. So the Ukrainians are trying to show again the United States. Look, look. Not only are we fighting the Russians in Mali, we're fighting the Iranian-linked militia in Iraq, and, and then, of course, on top of that, we had the the attack by Ukraine on the Iranian cargo ship in the Caspian, and again, the purpose was obvious, to show, hey, we're on your side. Look, look, we're fighting the Iranians. We're fighting the Iranians in the Caspian, fighting the Iranians in Iraq, and we're fighting the Russians in Mali. So they become this kind of global mercenary force in order to make themselves useful to the United States. So so that's kind of that. Yeah, I mean, it's so far Trump hasn't been particularly enthused by this, and so far, we never know which way Trump's going to go, but so far he's more or less said, thanks but no thanks. We can use. We don't need your help now, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. We have this Sebastian Gorka, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who in the Trump administration is urging the United States to get involved in Mali on the side of Ukraine and against the Russians. Of course, it's all being sold as, oh, we're going to fight the jihad, we're going to fight the radical Islamic terrorism, and global war on terror, and the bullshit. None of that is true. It's all about fighting the Russians, and of course making use of Ukraine to do so. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia, and then let me go back. And then here we have Robert. Good to see you. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert, for your generosity. Ted Postel mentioned Operation Bagration towards the end of World War II. I had never heard of it, but he described it as an enormous Soviet offensive. It was the biggest ever, and one of the battles that marked the beginning of the end of Germany. Could you say a few words about what happened and why it was so important? Well, Operation Bagration was launched really in conjunction with the D-Day landings. So I mean that was the big part of the purpose, because essentially, yes, you had the invasion, the Allied invasion of France, but there was a real concern that Germany might prove to be too formidable, and that ultimately, if the Germans just threw whatever they had at the Allied invading force in Normandy, the Germans might prevail and might defeat the Allied invasion. So the big three, the Allied powers, came up with this strategy, which of course the British and the French now never acknowledged. They came up with a strategy that the Soviet Union would mount one of its biggest offensives ever in order to force the Germans to push their forces to the east to deal with the Red Army. And that's what Bagration was about. So Bagration essentially was the final sweep through Poland and into Germany. It was an enormous operation. It was the biggest military operation of World War II. And with that defeat, it was of Germany, essentially the Red Army was now inside Germany. Poland had now been completely liberated, and the Red Army was now inside Germany. So it was a catastrophic defeat by the Germans. As I say, it was the biggest offensive, biggest Red Army offensive of the war. But the original planning was all about trying to take care of Germany. And then, in other words, that Germany would have a massive Red Army offensive to deal with in the east, and that would secure an Allied victory for the Western powers in the West. Now, as I say, what's so galling, and why I think the Russians are justifiably angry about this, is that their contribution to the success of the Normandy landings is always minimized. So every time there is this the celebration of the D-Day landings, it's always as if, well, here we are, the British, the French, the Americans, the Canadians. No, 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 no. We won. And then you never bring up the Red Army. Okay, fine. You don't want to talk about Stalingrad. Fine, don't talk about Stalingrad. You don't want to talk about the victory at Kursk. Fine, don't do that. But you have to talk about Operation Bagration, because that was part and parcel of that Allied invasion of Europe. It was part and parcel of it. The defeat that Germany suffered there was really essentially meant that the war really couldn't go on for much longer, because essentially the Red Army had now moved its forces into Germany. And so the end was clear. But yeah, it was absolutely the biggest Red Army operation of the war. Okay, anyway, Robert, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Linz, always good to see you. Thank you. And good to see you again. Haven't seen you in a while. So Liz says, good morning from down under, George. Long time no see. Yeah, it's been a long time. Hope you're well. Okay. George, in your last podcast, you seem to categorically state that Russia will never first strike NATO and induce Article 5. I don't think I said that. I think that there's quite a good chance that Russia will strike NATO in certain circumstances. I think if NATO engage, I mean, I'll give you an example where I think Russia would strike NATO. If for instance, Germany were to deliver one of their missiles, the Taurus missiles, those heavy intermediate range missiles to Ukraine, I think Russia would strike Germany. I mean, what would they do? I think they would hit German airfields. I think they would hit German air bases. They would hit German factories that were producing aircraft, that were producing missiles. So it would be a limited strike. I mean, they wouldn't start hitting Berlin, but they would hit Germany, because I think they would then regard this as an attempt to overturn the result of 1945. So the Russian would say, look, in 1945, we settled the German problem once and for all. And essentially by handing the Taurus missiles, which cannot be launched by Ukraine. only Germans can launch the Taurus missiles for Ukraine. So in other words, we are allowing Germany once again to hit targets deep inside Russia. We're allowing Germany to kill Russians, and they'll say this is an attempt to overturn the result of 1945. We cannot allow it. Therefore, we have to hit Germany. So that would be absolutely grounds on which Russia would attack a NATO power. I mean, I think that if there were an attack on Belarus, if Poland and Lithuania decided to mount some kind of an attack on Belarus, I think Russia would then hit NATO territory. So I think there are, I can think of a number of scenarios in which Russia would be the first to hit NATO territory and would say to NATO, well, go ahead, invoke Article 5. It's up to you. It's up to you if you want to go to uh, uh, war. You really wanted to have a direct military exchange with us. Fine, go ahead. But I think they would be in reasonably extreme circumstances where Russia would do this. But I certainly didn't say that I didn't think Russia would be the first. That Russia would never be the first to attack NATO territory. I think there are situations which I think Russia would be the first to attack. It was obvious that there was a buildup of NATO forces with the obvious intention to invade. You don't think Russia would not preemptively strike? Yeah, absolutely. If there were such a buildup of NATO forces, and Russia had reasonable grounds to believe that an invasion was possible, an invasion was imminent, and even if they did not invade Belarus, but it seems like they intend to invade Belarus, or they intend to take Kaliningrad, then I can see again Russia would preemptively attack NATO territory. So I absolutely do think that could happen. And then the SMO was preemptive in my view. Perhaps I misunderstood you. Yeah, I don't. I mean, I say a lot, so it's possible that you misunderstood. I absolutely do think that in certain circumstances, I think Russia is not going to do it unless it really feels that this is a serious violation of its red lines. I mean, I know people said, "Oh, red line after red line, Russia is allowed to cross," and that may be true, but there may be some real red lines that we may not know about. And I tend to think the real red line is Germany. I mean, that because that's a particular sore point for the Russians. And if Germany really, and that's why I think the Germans have been wary, not because they care about Russians or Ukrainians or anything like that, but the Germans have so far been wary about handing over the Taurus missile to Ukraine. Though there's some German politicians have blustered about this, but I think they do know that it's guaranteed that Russia would attack German territory in those circumstances. Anyway, thank you, Linz. Anne Marie, it's so good to see you again. Anne Marie, again, I tell would be members of the Gaggle that other than all the great comments from Robert and Cynthia and all the other Gagglers, we enjoy the benefits of Anne Marie's really outstanding commentary on music. She herself is, of course, a distinguished classical musician, a very internationally renowned violinist, who performs in the most famous orchestras in the world. So we're really very lucky to have her. I think all Gagglers are very, very honored to have her, and honored to enjoy her really interesting and insightful commentary about the playing of classical music, the composition of classical music, and of course the recounting of just very amusing anecdotes about what it's like to play classical music at the highest level, but even at a lower level. I mean, just how difficult it is, how challenging it often is, and those of us who are not professional musicians are always fascinated to read things like that. So, um, if you're thinking about joining the Gaggle, Anne Marie's musical commentary is just another inducement. Anyway, so thank you so much, Anne Marie. And then Cynthia responding to Robert's comment. On a side note, Ted Postel has said he has a learning disability that makes reading, especially extended passages, difficult. So he uses text to speech to have emails read aloud. It affects how he processes written text, not his intelligence or analytical ability. It's encouraging to know this because I have the same problem, though I'm nowhere near as smart as he is. Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that, Cynthia. You have such a you have this problem, but it's a good thing that these days such difficulties are overcome. Where before, people just had to give up reading simply because through deteriorating eyesight and so on. So I didn't know this about Ted Postel, so that's interesting. But I'm glad, Cynthia, that you found a way to get around this problem. And then Robert says, from our house to Bauhaus, they really nailed the determination of urban planners to make cities hideous. That, of course, Robert is quoting the title of a very amusing essay by Tom Wolfe, which precisely about the hideousness of modern design, and a design that was really undertaken with a view to make it as ghastly as possible, to make it as unattractive, as uninhabitable to humans, as non-human friendly as possible. And so when you look at the work of Le Corbusier, and he was really influential, and of course about the Bauhaus movement, and then so you realize what they did, and just how unhuman their work was. And again, I mean, it shouldn't be difficult to be able to design modern buildings that are actually attractive and pleasing to humans. But instead, they decided to go with these glass concrete monstrosities, and naturally, people stayed away because it was just everything about them was in your face, hostile to human living. So yeah, from Bauhaus to our house, well worth reading. About Tom Wolfe, he wrote this in the 1960s. Yeah, and Robert, thank you for reminding me about Carter Page's name. Yeah, but and then Richard Phillips says, "This is me being glib. It's like my best friend schizophrenic in the press beginning to sound like I'm not sure." To encourage people to believe paranoid. Okay, I'm not that seems like a conversation you're having with someone else, so I don't know what that refers to. Anyway, my time, of course, is up. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, everybody who joined me. Thank you above all for everybody who made all sorts of really interesting comments and raised fascinating questions. And thank you above all to those who put money into the tip jar. I thought there was a question that I don't know, which maybe I can't see, because I thought earlier I saw a question from Anne Marie, but I don't know where it's. But now I can't see it. Let's see. I thought maybe I saw. Yeah, because I want to. Anne Marie always asks me something interesting, but I don't. Let's see if I can just find it. Yeah, here's the question. Anne Marie says, the elites and the tech oligarchs, and through NATO following the hegemony. Let's see. Yeah, this is where, yeah. So Anne gets it's a two-part question from Anne Marie. I just wonder why one hears all the time that Israel has taken over the U.S., which is certainly not wrong, and that the U.S. Israel's war on Gaza and the war against Iran and against Russia, etc., are not in America's interest and are actively nor Trump's wars, and that he wants to get out of them. I must admit that I don't believe that for a second. Of course, all these wars are not interest of the American people, but aren't they in the interest of the American powers to be, their elites and the tech oligarchs, and through NATO following their hegemonial goals? I think Israel is using the US for her goals to achieve the greater Israel, and the US in turn is using Israel and her goals to expand. Why are the US building this huge embassy in Lebanon? In order to expand their own power and grab the resources of Iran, as well as Venezuela, etc. In other words, to further try to dominate the globe. Well, that's a I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, you can obviously argue it both ways. Um, the question then is, how much does Israel really help the United States? So you're right, Anne Marie. It's clear what Israel wants. Israel wants to create a greater Israel. It wants to somehow get rid of the whole Palestinian problem, solve it once and for all. It has never really figured out how it can do it. It doesn't have the strength or the will to do it itself. It hopes that the United States will do it for Israel, but the United States is unlikely to do that because, getting rid of 2 million Palestinians is that's a tall order. But anyway, so we know with the Israel agenda, where I think I come down on that is that I don't think that Israel does really very much for the United States, because when you look at the Middle East, you look at Saudi Arabia, you look at the Gulf states, you look at Egypt, you look at Jordan, all of these states, these Arab states, are basically pro-American. They're essentially, you can call them satellites, you can call them client states of the United States. They're more than ready to do anything the United States wants. The only reason they, in any way, thwart the United States, the only reason why they give the United States sometimes a hard time, is the issue of Palestine. I mean, because they all have populations that feel very strongly about the Palestinians. And so, therefore, you think Israel really doesn't do much for the United States. It's actually creating animosity, it's creating problems for the United States because, because the Arabs, I got to turn these rich Arabs who basically, they like America. They like going to the West. They like making money. They like, investing money in the United States. The United States investing money in their country. They like spending their money in casinos. But the only thing, the only fly in the ointment for them is Israel. And so Israel is more of a problem for the United States than something that advances its goals. I can't see how Israel advances America's goal. I mean, Israel is continually waging wars against its neighbors. These wars continue to suck America in. By sucking America in, then it's creating enemies throughout the Middle East. I mean, there are people who feel very agitated about the United States. And what is the one thing they all hate about the United States? Not because America's rich, not because America is a capitalist paradise. They don't care about that. The one thing that they have against the United States is the United States facilitates Israel. The United States bankrolls Israel. The United States pours these arms into Israel. And that's the thing. I mean, when you go back to Bin Laden's letter to America, or whatever it was called, then everything goes back to that issue, the issue of American support for Israel. And I think that Bin Laden spoke for many people in that part of the world. That's what really gets them is that you have the state that was inducted into the United Nations on very strict conditions that it was supposed to address. At that time, it was the Palestinian refugee problem. Israel never addressed that. And then later on, it was supposed to recognize, it was supposed to progress towards a two-state solution. It never did that. And so it just remained the sole point. And it continues to remain the sole point. Now the sole point is Iran. And why is Iran such a sore point? Not because of the Ayatollahs. I mean, America wouldn't be worried about the Ayatollah. What the hell does he care about the Ayatollahs? I mean, there's Shia Islam. Is America going to go Muslim? No, of course America's not going to go Muslim. And Shia, in any case, is a minority sect within the world of Islam. It's a minority sect, so it doesn't really matter. So what's the problem with Iran? The problem with Iran is that it leads the opposition to Israel. And of course, Israel then goes to the United States and says, hey, Iran is a real problem for us because it's leading the opposition to us. And that leads then to America, constant aggravation with Iran, and then these perpetual wars against Iran, which again don't look like they're going to be resolved anytime soon. So again, it's a source of headaches, and doesn't advance American interest, because American interest wouldn't be difficult to advance. I mean, all of these Gulf states, the Saudi Arabia, they're more than happy to work with America because they just want to make money. That's all they want to care about. They care about money, making money, lots and lots and lots of money. And America's happy. Trump is, he kind of told them when he visited them, hey, we're going to make a lot of money. All of us together, we're going to make money. And they said, yeah, fantastic. That's all we're really interested in. But please, one thing you need to address. What about the Palestinians? And basically, America is unable to do that because of its relationship with Israel. It refuses to do that, despite the fact that the United States has in public supported all of the UN Security Council resolutions on resolving the Palestinian problem. The United States has not done that. And that creates problems. I mean, you get problems down the road. So there's the Iran, it's Iran. But even if, America resolves this Iran problem, at some point, I don't know, now in the next 10 years, there's still going to be the problem. I mean, this is the Israeli delusion or an Israeli agents in America's delusion. Somehow, once you've got the Iran out of the way, then we don't have to worry about the Palestinians anymore. I think it's delusional, but that's the line that comes out of Tel Aviv. That's the line that so many American politicians accept. Oh, if we get rid of Iran, get rid of these Ayatollahs, then we're not going to have a problem with the Palestinians, and therefore, Israel isn't going to have a problem anymore. Well, I think they will. And because I've heard there've been too many of these exactly the same claims over the years. Oh, if we only got rid of Yasser Arafat, everything would be great. Oh, if only we got rid of Saddam Hussein, everything would be great. Oh, if only we got rid of Muammar Gaddafi, everything would be great. Oh, if only we got rid of Gamal Abdel Nasser, everything would be great. Well, it wasn't great. Anyway, that's how I would do it. In conclusion, I just say that I don't think Israel does anything to advance American interests. I don't think Israel does anything to make America more secure. But I think people will disagree. People have disagreed. So, Anne-Marie, you may disagree with my take. Anyway, thank you so much for your question, and thank you much, obviously, for all your generosity and all of your fascinating commentary. Anyway, my time is up. We will be back. I hope we'll have a live stream jointly with Peter next Monday. But if that doesn't work out, please join me next Tuesday for another solo live stream. Look forward to that. Until then, all the best. Bye-bye. See you soon.